Hello, my name is Kyle Hirschfeld, and I'm here to talk to you about Pedlar and Divinity, George Whitefield and the Great Awakening from 1737 to 1745. This is an article written by Frank Lambert, and Lambert opens up his article discussing why Whitefield is a genius. And ultimately, he draws the conclusion that because Whitefield was so successful in marrying the ideas of commerce and religion, that we should really view him in the light of being the single best example of Puritan ideals in commercial success in the Americas. He starts by looking at Whitefield's life in London, where he met a man named William Seward. Seward was a great promoter, and he noticed in Whitefield the tools which would make Whitefield such a successful and ultimately fantastic promoter himself. So Seward really helped Whitefield find out how to market himself, how to advertise, and how to get his word out there. And over the course of the next 10 to 30 years, Whitefield becomes a major force in the transatlantic region. He does this by getting his name out in newspapers. He becomes syndicated weekly. Everything he writes, everything he puts down, once a week, it's put out into the media. People are debating about him. Various newspapers are discussing who he is and what his ideas are and why he is such an inflammatory figure. And it was this idea of him being an inflammatory figure which really intrigued me. So in my own studies, I looked up Ava Chamberlain's The Grand Sower of the Sea, Jonathon Edwards' critique of George Whitefield. And I wanted to look into these negative effects of what George Whitefield was saying, because in Lambert's article, it really made it seem like Whitefield was just a master of spin. So I wanted to know what that meant. What more could I figure out about that? So during this November of 1740, Whitefield visited Jonathon Edwards' parish in Northampton. During this time, Whitefield was invited to create and produce 4 sermons. He did this in front of Edwards' parish, and Whitefield spoke about it and wrote about it as a major success. He called it, one of the successes of his awakening career. In fact, he discusses in his own writings, Whitefield does, that people in this parish over those 4 sermons were weeping tears. They were coming closer to God. They were figuring out more about the Holy Spirit. And he writes of this as if it were a fantastic success. As soon as he leaves, Edwards starts preaching again, and what Edwards comes to the conclusion of, and this is through his sermons, is that ultimately his parish and the parishioners therein were not that religious in the first place. So really, they were just faking it, and Whitefield didn't get the reaction exactly the way he said. This is in Edwards' view. So firstly, we see that Whitefield inspired jealousy in some of his opponents. Now, a more clear example of the negative impacts that Whitefield's writings and preachings had on other peoples is found in a series of sermons that he conducted in Charlestown, South Carolina, from 1739 to 1745. And this is coming from an article by Fred Witzig called The Great Anti-Awakening, Anti-Revivalism in Philadelphia and Charlestown from South Carolina from 1739 to 1745. In his article, Witzig focuses on 2 events, and I'll talk about one right now. He focuses on Whitefield's first visit to Charleston. Now, during this event, he comes to this Baptist church, staunchly Baptist church, and he preaches, and he's got his whole kit and caboodle going. He's getting really into his sermon, and ultimately the Baptist parishioners, they stonewall him. They do not care about his message. They do not meet him where he wants them to meet him. And this results in, well, Whitefield doesn't talk about it. He doesn't write about it. And why would he? It wasn't a successful attempt. But it just goes to show that Whitefield wasn't always successful. And that is not to say at all that Whitefield was not a fantastic and successful entrepreneur and a trailblazer in marrying those ideas of market and religion, because he absolutely was.